In 1975, a quiet Ohio town was rocked by a brutal murder, a case that would haunt the community for nearly half a century. Police followed every lead: boyfriends, strangers, even drifters, but every clue turned into a dead end. For decades, the file sat in storage, gathering dust, while the family prayed for answers that never came. Then, nearly 50 years later, one tiny envelope in an evidence box revealed a secret no one expected. A DNA test pointed to a man everyone thought they knew, a man who had lived among them, hidden in plain sight. And when his name was revealed, the entire community was left speechless. Before we dive into this shocking cold case story, make sure to hit subscribe and turn on notifications, so you never miss the mysteries we uncover. On a cold March morning in 1975, in a town that prided itself on being quiet and self-contained, a jogger cut south along the river path and stopped. The Scioto ran dull and pewter that day, rimmed with a crust of late ice. In a stand of willow and sycamore, just past mile marker 2, he saw color where there shouldn't have been any: a blue floral skirt tangled in cattails, a pale arm splayed on muddy ground. When he knelt, he realized the color was only part of it. The stillness was the rest. The victim was 17. Her name, learned hours later when a mother's frantic phone call matched a description, was Elaine Harper. She was a high school senior, second chair clarinet, part-time cashier at the feed store, and, as far as anyone knew, not the kind of person to make news. This would be the first time she did. It would not be the last. The scene told a story in fragments. Tire tracks pressed a herringbone of tread into the softened earth, indistinct. A torn strap lay 6 feet from the body. A single earring, pearl-like but plastic, had embedded itself in silt by the river. The medical examiner would note bruising on the left wrist consistent with binding, dirt in the lungs suggesting she'd inhaled river water, but not enough to list drowning as the cause. Strangulation, he concluded. An assault. The kind that made mothers move in pairs and fathers check locks twice. By noon the perimeter was taped. Sheriff's deputies pushed back the small knot of bystanders. Reporters from the county weekly arrived with spiral notebooks. Everyone else went home and told someone else what they'd seen. In a town of 12,000, secrecy behaves like steam, it finds seams. Elaine was last seen the night before, Friday, leaving the community center after a basketball game. It was the kind of place where the scoreboard clock echoed off steel rafters and the concession stand smelled like popcorn and snow-soaked wool. Her friends said she'd argued with her boyfriend, Danny McKee, outside by the flagpole. Not yelling, just sharp, fast voices. Then she had walked away toward the parking lot, head down, scarf tucked into her coat, carrying a brown paper sack with a borrowed music book. At least 2 classmates saw her near the payphone by the diner at 9:30 p.m. The waitress remembered pouring her a small coffee to warm up while she flipped through sheet music and scribbled measures in pencil. Around 10 p.m., a busboy propped the alley door open to shake out a mat and noticed a sedan idling across the street. 2-door, dark color, square taillights. He thought nothing of it. When Elaine's mother woke at 1 a.m. to a quiet house and an empty bed, she made 3 calls, to the Pattersons down the block, to the McKees, and then to the sheriff's office. By dawn, the jogger had made the 4th. Investigations often start with what seems obvious. In 1975, obvious was the boyfriend. Danny McKee was 18, a graduating senior with a football ring and a part-time job at the mill. Officers brought him in at 8 a.m. He sat in a chair with tape peeling from the armrests and answered every question, eyes raw, hands pink from scrubbing at the station sink. He admitted to the argument. He'd wanted to drive out to Lake Ellen for an hour. She wanted to go home. He said he left angry, drove to a friend's place to play cards, and crashed on the couch. The friend, Tommy Reed, confirmed it. A second friend, roused by a call, backed the story. The timeline held. Next was the stranger theory. A delivery driver had been seen twice on Main Street over the week, pulling into the alley behind the diner where the payphone was. He wore a blue jacket with a missing zipper pull. He did not work for any local company. A deputy tracked him to a motel off Route 23 where the night clerk, in a smoke-fogged lobby, remembered him paying in cash. By the time officers checked the register, the man was gone, and the initials he left might not have been his. Another lead came from the river itself. George Lawson, a Korean War veteran who fished year-round, told deputies he'd packed up at 9:45 p.m. after noticing a car downshifting somewhere on the La Vie Road. A car downshifting was not unusual. But he added something else, a girl's laugh, short and clipped, and then a coughing sound. He couldn't place the direction. The river plays tricks with sound. It lobs it back at you from reeds and bends. The smallest details rose and fell in importance. A torn strap, a half-moon scuff on Elaine's right shoe, a tiny rectangle of adhesive on the back of her earring as if it had been repaired once before. Detectives filled legal pads until there was nothing left to fill. It is hard, decades later, to understand how thin a case could feel before DNA. The lab collected the usual: hairs, fibers, a partial latent print on the torn strap. The print did not match anyone in the tiny index the county kept. Fibers lifted from Elaine's skirt suggested a synthetic blend common to dozens of clothing brands. The medical examiner preserved swabs and cuttings according to the practices of the day: sealed paper envelopes, labels written in looping script. There was no concept of genetic genealogy, of databases like the ones the future would build. One trace did stand apart, even then: a faint, oily residue near the bruising on Elaine's wrist. Lab notes called it petroleum-based, mechanic-adjacent. The mill employed mechanics. So did every barn in a 40-mile radius. For the first month, the investigation felt urgent. The sheriff's office interviewed 69 people. The school hosted a safety talk. Town council voted to install additional streetlights near the river path. Then tips slowed. A rumor settled on the feed store where Elaine worked. A regular, Calvin Dorsey, a widower in his 40s, had a reputation for drinking. Someone said he'd been seen with a bruised knuckle the day after the murder. He told deputies he'd slammed a door on his hand, and his foreman vouched for him on the night in question. Dorsey faded as a suspect but stayed a cautionary tale. There was a drifter, Red Lafferty, who rode boxcars and sometimes slept behind the depot. A patrolman ran him down near Chillicothe and brought him in. Red, bleary-eyed, confessed to 3 different crimes, all of them verifiably impossible. He wanted a sandwich and a bed. He got both, plus a bus ticket out of town. The case file labeled his interview non-probative. By summer, the case had its first lull. The newspaper printed a yearbook photo of Elaine and asked readers to remember anything at all. Memorial flowers appeared by mile marker 2, then browned in the sun. By fall of 1976, the homicide file had swelled to 3 binders. Deputies turned over. A new prosecutor took office and believed time was better spent on cases with defendants attached. The riverbank collected snow and then spring thaws, and then weeds instead of answers. People learned to live with not knowing. That is how cold cases chill a place, not with fear, but with a draft that never stops. Evidence sat in a climate-controlled room and did what evidence does. It waited. In 1991, the state lab, newly equipped with RFLP DNA testing, offered to examine stored biological evidence from unsolved cases. The envelope from Elaine's case, still sealed, still legibly signed by a technician who'd retired to Florida, was logged and shipped. The sample was degraded. Time and humidity are never neutral, but a partial male profile was recovered. It wasn't enough to point to a person. It was enough to rule out some. Danny McKee, older now, married with a toddler, gave a reference swab. Not a match. A bitter relief. In 2003, with STR testing now standard, the lab tried again, extracting a more robust profile from the preserved cuttings. The profile was uploaded to CODIS, the national database. No hit. The detective assigned that year, Marta Sloan, wrote in her notebook a line she would return to years later. The DNA is a light, but we need a path. In 2018, everything changed, first for crimes in the headlines, then for the ones tucked in file rooms. Genetic genealogy entered the lexicon. The idea that you could search public genealogy databases for a suspect's distant relatives and climb the branches back to a name moved from theory to practice. It took time to reach small counties. Money, too. In 2022, the county secured a grant for cold case work. A forensic genealogist, Alyssa Wren, was contracted. The envelope was opened again, carefully, like a ritual. A new lab, specialized in low template samples, extracted additional markers. A single, clean allelic profile emerged, the same man as before, only clearer. What followed was part science, part spadework. Wren uploaded the profile to a public genealogy database with the necessary permissions. She waited for matches. They came, not a close cousin, not a sibling, but several people sharing small segments of DNA indicative of third to fourth cousin relationships. The surnames were scattered: Bennett, Law, Ritter. The geography converged on Appalachian Ohio and eastern Kentucky. Working with detectives, Wren built out family trees from census records, obituaries, and archived high school yearbooks. She marked the branches that reached into the town in 1975. The name Ritter appeared on an old property map near the river, a mechanic's garage that had closed in 1983. One Ritter's son, Harold Hal Ritter, had been 22 in 1975, a part-time mechanic with a blue jacket and a habit of circling town after closing. He was never interviewed back then. He was well-liked, the kind of guy who changed your oil for half price and called you even if you were 19. But by 1986, Hal had moved to Toledo. By 1998, he died of a heart condition at 45. If he was the source of the DNA, they would need a sample to confirm it. As word of the renewed investigation spread, so did opinion. At the diner, now remodeled but still smelling faintly of coffee and mop water, arguments sprouted at corner booths. Some said let the dead lie. Others said the dead were already lying, which was the point. The prosecutor weighed options. Known reference samples, a razor, a hat, were long gone. A pillowcase saved by a sister yielded nothing usable. In the end, A judge signed an order permitting exhumation for the limited purpose of obtaining a DNA sample. On a grey morning in April 2024, deputies, a representative from the medical examiner's office, and two men from a funeral home gathered at a small cemetery at the edge of town. They worked with quiet efficiency. An affidavit later described the process only in clinical terms. Inside the lab, a bone sample yielded DNA that could be compared to the profile from Elaine's case. The numbers don't speak in words. They speak in probabilities. The match statistics were astronomical. The chance of the DNA belonging to someone unrelated to Hal Ritter was, for practical purposes, 0. Detectives drove to a split level on a cul-de-sac where Marla Ritter, Hal's widow, had lived since 1992. They introduced themselves and asked if they could speak with her. She had heard the rumors. She had heard, too, that investigators were looking into the old garage. She invited them in and made coffee as if muscle memory could solve anything. When they told her about the DNA, she sat very still. Then she said, "Hal was not that man." They asked about 1975. Hal had been living at home, working late, sometimes fishing on the river with friends. He wore that greasy blue jacket, she said. I still remember the smell, like metal and winter. Did he ever come home late, wet, agitated? Did he ever mention Elaine? No, no, and no. The more pointed the questions became, the more tightly she held her coffee cup. They spoke with Hal's brother, Eddie, who ran the garage with him. Eddie remembered a Friday night when Hal borrowed the shop truck after hours, a two-door with square taillights and a missing logo badge. Told me he was hauling scrap, Eddie said. Brought it back clean. Funny thing, the floor mat was gone on the passenger side. Figured it tore. Witnesses' memories, like river sounds, were imperfect. But the pattern began to hold. When authorities announced the identification in June 2024, the town absorbed it in stages. Press conference. Microphones. The sheriff stood at a wooden podium that had been used for award ceremonies and retirement parties. He read from prepared remarks, voice steady. The words DNA, probability, consistent with, and identified as the probable assailant unfolded in a controlled cadence. The shock was not only that the case had been solved. It was who they were saying had done it. People remembered Hal as the guy who'd sponsored a Little League team, who'd waved from the bay door of the garage. Teachers remembered him fixing a school bus carburetor on a Saturday. He was not mythical, he was ordinary. The DNA said otherwise, and that left a hurt that didn't heal clean. At the vigil by the river, Elaine's classmates, now grandparents, held candles. Her mother had passed years earlier. Her younger brother, Mark, spoke for the family. He thanked investigators. He said he'd lived most of his life with a question mark stitched into his days. Now there was a period. It did not make the sentence easier, only complete. After the announcement, detectives combed through other unsolved assaults in the region from the mid-1970s. Two cases shared similar features: a nighttime abduction near a walkway, binding marks, the absence of robbery as motive. One survivor, interviewed now in her 60s, recalled a man who smelled like motor oil and winter. The lab compared DNA from one case to Ritter's profile. Degradation made it inconclusive. The survivor, hearing the name, said, "Maybe." Memory is a fact with a weather pattern. For the official record, the Elaine Harper case moved from unsolved to cleared by exceptional means. The district attorney noted that, had he been alive, Ritter would have been charged with first-degree murder and aggravated assault. The phrase, "no further action," concluded the report. The question people asked most was less who. Then why did it take this long? The answer was several answers. In 1975, no DNA. In 1991, partial. In 2003, not in the database. In 2018, the tool arrived, but budgets lagged. Human memory erodes, envelopes don't. Cold cases often hinge on whether someone kept a promise to save. In this case, a technician's good habits, a detective's persistence, and a grant's timing aligned. There is also the human piece. No one who knew Hal Ritter in 1975 thought to put him in a police station chair. He seemed helpful. He seemed busy. He seemed like 100 other men. Predators are not always wolves in the storybook sense. Sometimes they are people who retake your tires and leave a mint on the dashboard. Reconstruction is never perfect, but it is the best that the living can do for the dead. Investigators believe this is what happened. After the basketball game, Elaine walked to the diner to warm up and study her music. At approximately 10 p.m., she left the back door into the alley. Across the street, a two-door shop truck idled. The driver called out, maybe offering a ride, maybe asking for directions, maybe using her name if he already knew it. When she hesitated, he matched her pace. At some point, within a block or two, he coerced her into the truck. The torn strap suggests a struggle. The bruising on the wrist suggests restraint, perhaps with a strap from the shop. The vehicle turned toward the Levee Road. The assignation by the river lasted minutes, maybe longer. The assault occurred. The strangulation followed. He carried her to the reeds. The scuff on her shoe suggests she caught a rock and twisted as she was dragged. The river inhaled 3 breaths from her. He drove away, through the passenger floor mat somewhere it would never be found, and returned the truck later, quieter, cleaner, missing a piece. All of that is supported by fragments of evidence tied together by one clear signal, DNA, drawn across half a century to a bone in a lab dish. In the months after the announcement, the town learned to speak about the case differently. Not with the hush of a campfire story, but with the cadence of a memorial. The high school created a scholarship in Elaine's name for a student in the music program. The river path added a plaque near mile marker 2 with simple text, in memory of a classmate lost and a question answered. People still argue about the exhumation. Some grieve the man they thought they knew. Others say grief is better anchored to truth than to the shape of a lie. Detective Marta Sloan, now close to retirement, keeps her notebook with the line about needing a path. She talks about luck, but not much. She talks more about promises, to the families, to the envelopes, to the idea that time can be bridged by attention. Every case starts with a person, she says, and every file is a promise we made to them. In 1975, a quiet town learned how fast the river could pull. In 2024, that same town learned that the current runs both ways, that with patience, science, and the stubborn persistence of a few, truth can be hauled back to shore. The community is shocked, yes. But shock is only the first feeling. The second is a steadier one. This is how a cold case ends, not with applause, not with triumph, but with a door unlatching somewhere you thought was permanently stuck. A name is spoken aloud, and the air changes. The path along the river looks the same, but those who walk it now carry both the weight of what happened and the faint, enduring proof that answers are possible, even after 50 years of not knowing.